Hi there, I'm Anna Tolinsky with VSAC, and I am here today talking to my colleague Anna Prescott, who's going to tell us a bit more about her work. So, Anna, can you start by telling us your job title?
Yep, I am the Evaluation and Research Analyst in the Education Outreach Department at VSAC. And VSAC stands for the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. It's a nonprofit organization in Vermont.
And can you tell us a little bit more about what your job entails?
Yeah, so basically I work for grants, and what that means is that our department gets money from the government that we use to provide services to help K-12 students and adults get training and figure out how to get into college and that sort of thing. So because we're getting money from the government, we have to show the government that we're using that money responsibly and that the programs that we're providing with that money are actually useful. So what that means is we have to track how many services we're giving to people, what those services are, and then also things about whether they're working. So we track things like whether the students who get our services graduate from high school, whether they go on to college, and things like that. So all of that information needs to be collected by somebody. Somebody has to figure out what exactly to collect, how to collect it, what system to use to organize it, how to tally it all up. And then when you get all those results in, someone has to interpret them, write reports, and explain them to people. So that's what I do. I'm basically the person at VSAC who tracks all the numbers and interprets them so we can figure out what's going well and what's not going so well. And it ensures that because we're getting all this information to the government, we keep getting that money, which means that we can keep doing the services. And we also do things like we sometimes give surveys to the people that we are working with to ask them for feedback and that sort of thing. So I'm also the person who designs most of those surveys. Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your educational background and how you came into this sort of work?
Yeah, so I did not plan on doing this career. I didn't actually know that it existed until I saw the job posting for it. So after high school, I went to college, and that was because I loved to learn. And I ended up majoring in psychology because I thought people were really interesting to study. And in psychology, I could use a scientific approach and math and statistics to study why people do what they do. And that was pretty cool. So I ended up majoring in that just because I thought it was super interesting. And after college, I went on to graduate school to do research in psychology. So basically, yeah, I went to graduate school at Dartmouth and got a doctorate in experimental social psychology. So what you basically do as a graduate student or when you're getting a doctorate is you get paid to go to school in most programs, and you're not in classes, you're spending your time studying something that's interesting to you and designing experiments and running those experiments and then doing a lot of troubleshooting, figuring out what went wrong and like running more experiments. So you get a lot of skills in like, yeah, how to run experiments, how to interpret data, all that stuff. So after I got my PhD, I was like, I think I'll teach college. Like, I think I'll be a professor and I'll keep doing research and I'll teach students also. But I wanted to stay in Vermont. And it turns out that there weren't a lot of jobs teaching psychology at colleges in Vermont. So while I was still looking for a job doing that, I saw the posting for the job that I'm in now. And I didn't know what an evaluator was. I didn't really know what that meant. But when I looked at the job skills and requirements, they were exactly what they were my skills. So I applied for it and I got it. And it turns out that it's a perfect fit for me. So it works out. Yeah.
Thanks. What's one of your favorite things about your job?
I think the best thing about my job is that, well, I work with a really good team, but that's not inherent to the job. That's just mostly because I lucked out and the organization is good. But what I like about my job is that I get to use these skills that I learned for something that's really immediately helpful. So when you're doing research, a lot of the time it's like, and I mean like when I was a graduate student, or if you're a researcher for your career, a lot of the times you're publishing results, but the only people who read them often are other people who do research. So they sometimes don't get to regular people, and they don't have an impact on the people that you're actually trying to help. In this job, the work that I'm doing has really immediate impacts on people, because it means that we get to keep our funding and that we keep giving these services. There's a lot more connection between the work I'm doing and actual people who I'm trying to help, which I think is really cool. And it's also nice, sometimes it's challenging to work in a team where I'm one of the only people who has training in data and statistics. And that can be challenging at times because I'm almost speaking a different language than the rest of my team sometimes, but it also means that I feel really useful. If anybody on the team has questions about numbers or data, they'll come to me and I can help. So I feel really appreciated and really useful, because I'm one of the only people in my team who has this skill set.
What do you find the most challenging about your work?
I think being the only one who has my background in my team is one of the challenging things. It can feel lonely sometimes, but I get to go to conferences a couple times a year where I get to hang out with other people who are in exactly my boat, and that's really nice. So that's one way to manage that feeling. Another thing that's challenging is that one of the things I really liked about doing research when I was still studying, when I was in graduate school, is that you get to design these experiments that are like perfectly designed in the lab, and you have all this control over what they're doing. And then in my job now, I don't have much control at all. Like, students are going to do what they're going to do, and then I'm collecting data about them and trying to figure out what I can, but I don't have, the data doesn't, it's not an experiment. Like, we're not experimenting on these students, which would be a problem if we were. What we're doing is observational. We're studying what's happening and then trying to figure out what it means for whether our programming is working. But that's messier. It's just messier. And the part of me that loves order and clean data struggles with that. Like, I want the students to behave in a perfectly predictable way, and they don't. So that can be challenging too.
Can you walk us through what a typical day looks like for you?
Well, I think one of the things that I like about my job is that I don't have a truly typical day. I will say that most of my work is at a computer or in an office. You know, when I'm running surveys and things, I'm designing them on the computer, and they're often administered online. So what it looks like if you are watching me is a lot of typing on a computer. I do actually like use my calculator to calculate things sometimes, but a lot of it is just on screens. But I'm doing different things. Like, sometimes I'm writing reports, sometimes I'm analyzing data. This summer I started trying to learn to code, so like computer science almost. So I've been learning a new skill set so that I can analyze data in a more powerful way with more flexibility. Bigger data sets is going to be easier if I know how to code with this program. And what I like about it is that I have a lot of flexibility in how my day goes most of the time. Sometimes I have meetings, and those meetings I have to show up to at a certain time. But the rest of the time, like, if I'm not feeling like writing right now, I can work on something else right now, and I can work on writing later. It also means that I need to be pretty focused and pretty disciplined about staying on task, because no one's really watching what I'm doing. So, you know, if I wanted to just waste time all day, in theory I could, but then I wouldn't get anything done, and that's not good for anybody. Eventually someone would notice, and that would be a problem. So I have to be very self-disciplined, but I do have a lot of flexibility in how my day goes. Like, I can take lunch early or late. I like that.
Thanks. Let's see. What do you think would make someone a good fit for your type of work, if a student is thinking about it?
Yeah. I think just being interested in finding the answers. So if you're somebody who likes science and likes asking questions and you like classes where you get to collect data and then try to interpret your findings, those are the sorts of things that I'm doing really when it comes down to it. Yeah, and I think it's hard to say because I didn't train to be an evaluator. Like that wasn't a thing I was working toward. It just turns out that that's a really good fit for me. I don't even know if there's training specifically for that. There might be like evaluator master's programs. I have no idea. But as long as you're taking math and science and getting those skills about how to think logically, that's really important. Like thinking logically and being detail oriented are really important basic skills that are a little bit harder to train yourself on, but you can do it. Those are important. And also being able to think, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes is important. A lot of people don't think about that for data, but if you can't understand how another person is interpreting what you're trying to tell them, you're probably not communicating data very well, and then you're not as helpful. You're not able to do as much if you can't communicate. Mm-hmm. And it does often feel like I'm having to translate something very complex for people who don't speak that language. So there's a lot of, like thinking about the thing I'm trying to tell somebody, how will they hear it and how do I need to adjust it so they can understand it without my skill set, if that makes sense, yeah.
You sort of already answered this with math and science classes, but if a student is thinking about this kind of work, what would you recommend that they do to continue to explore it? Like, is there volunteer work or classes, projects at home, part-time jobs, that sort of thing that you think would be helpful to move someone in this direction?
Yeah, I think, keep taking math and science classes, especially learning about experimental design and statistics. Those are both really important areas. But the other thing is that there's somebody doing evaluation or data reporting, like data tracking in almost any organization. Mm-hmm. So if there's, I think it helps if you are actually interested in the bigger scale thing your company's doing. Like when I applied for this job, I got the job, and I think that's because in graduate school I spent my free time doing science outreach. So it was easy for the people who were interviewing me to see that this was actually something I cared about. Like I care about education outreach because I've already been doing it and I clearly have this passion for it. And now I'm just happening to also be the evaluator, but working toward this goal. I applied for other jobs like transportation logistics something, and I did not get that job because I don't really care about transportation logistics, and they could tell when I was interviewing. So it's also important to kind of know what you care about and explore your interests so that when you're applying for these jobs, you're really, you can tell what's a good fit for you. You're more likely to get a job if it's a good match for your values and that sort of thing, because the interviewers will be able to tell.
That's great, thanks. And then I feel like you already sort of addressed this too, but any other kind of words of advice around education or training that someone should be thinking about down the road for if they want to do this kind of work?
I think one thing that people don't realize, if you start talking about getting a PhD, people are like, wow, that's a lot of school. Like I'm finishing high school, for example. Maybe if you're finishing high school and you're thinking about what you want to do next, you think about getting a PhD and you're like, okay, that's 4 years of college probably. And then another like 5 years or more of PhD, of graduate school. And they're just like, that is ridiculous. I barely made it through high school. I don't like going to class every day. It's just, I think it's important to think of two things. So when you go to college, you already have a whole lot more independence in what you're studying. So you're taking classes you care about more than you're in high school. You get very little choice in what you're studying. In college, you get more, and you also have more free time. So you go to class for a few hours a day, but then the rest of the time you're doing homework by yourself or with your friends or whatever. In graduate school, it's like a whole nother level of that. I think I only took maybe 6 classes or something in the 5 years that I was studying. And those were once a week. And they were like, let's talk about issues in this field that are interesting. So it doesn't feel like high school or middle school. it feels like a job. Like I went to lab every day. I studied, I would design these experiments. I had so much independence. I could go into lab whenever I wanted. I could work late if I wanted to. I would go for runs in the middle of the day and then go back and do more work afterward. Like you have a whole lot of independence, and it just doesn't feel the same. Also, if you're going to get a PhD in science, you don't have to pay for it, hardly ever. You shouldn't have to pay for it because you get a stipend. So that's important to know too. You're not looking at another 5 years of paying for school. If it's in the sciences, it should be free for you. So 2 important things. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that earlier. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's more like a job where you get a degree at the end. So.
Cool, thanks. Anything else you want to say to students who are listening about your work or training?
If you think math is boring right now, don't think too hard about that, because just doing problems is not how you're actually using math in the real world. So give it a chance. Stick with it for a while and see if it's, yeah. As long as you're, I don't really know what to say about that. I just think a lot of people hate math, or they think they do, until they figure out how they can use it for things that matter.
That's great. Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.